Oh, thank you, Char. It's all yours.
Okay, so I was going to share my screen. I hope everybody can see this. Um, there we go. Can
Mm.
you all see a map of Scotland?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so despite my accent now, I used to speak like this because I grew up in Scotland and uh, just a little way from this is Cairnpapple here, about slightly nearer Edinburgh than it is to Glasgow, and I grew up just to the left of Cairnpapple, so it was somewhere that we used to go. It's a very harsh industrial belt, central belt of Scotland, post-industrial, very poor, very run down when I lived there, and I lived just near there, number 8 on the map, and there's Cairnpapple here. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Good. So, and here's Edinburgh, as you see, and there's the Forth Road and Rail Bridge. Uh, so I'll just zoom in a little bit more so you can see. So, there's Cairnpapple. There, my childhood home was just off the map there, in front of it, right next to a huge council estate and a huge cemetery. It was really delightful. And we used to come along to Linlithgow here, to Linlithgow Palace, which is one of the many places that Mary Queen of Scots was held prisoner. It's a huge ruin. Highly recommend going and having a look at it if you're up in that area. And we used to go canoeing on Linlithgow Loch, and then come walking up the hills here. They're just small, fairly small hills for Scotland. They'd be enormous in where I live now in Leicestershire. We used to come up to Cockleroy, which is the main hill in the area, and then down the other side to Cairnpapple Hill here. And as you can see, it's next to a small place called Torfichan, which has got a preceptory in, which I'll come on to at the end of the talk. So that's just to put you in the picture there. Um, it was I came across this just yesterday. It's not East Lothian, by the way, it's West Lothian, so that's to the west of Edinburgh. I came across this just yesterday. I'm sorry about the not great quality of it. Can I make it a bit bigger? No, I can't. Um, this is the original excavators map before they started excavating at Cairnpapple. This is 1947. The excavation of Cairnpapple was 1947-48 by a Professor Stuart Piggott. He came from Oxford and was offered the chair of archaeology at Edinburgh University just the year before, so 1946. So this is just straight after the Second World War. Excuse me, I need to. It's the trouble when you're just getting over a cold. Um, so I don't know if you can see, but you don't need to see too much detail on this, but you can see there's a ditch and a bank here, and then some scattered stones in a sort of egg shape here, and then this here says cairn. And when I was looking at it under a magnifying glass yesterday, I realized that what I'm looking at is a cairn that's been broken into. So this part of the cairn here is um, still complete, but the cairn has obviously been broken into at some point um, since Bronze Age times. And I came across simply one reference much later on in my research to say that a lot of the nice stones that they used for curbstones and for the kist burial had clearly been robbed out by local people. So they're presumably dragging them off to make barns and houses and stuff. And that Torfichan preceptory that I talked about as well, um, there's a very strong suspicion, in fact, it's more than a suspicion now, that when that very early church was built, back in something like 600, they took quite a lot of standing stones and other pieces of large stone from Cairnpapple, took them to the church to sort of Christianize them, as has been done throughout the ages, to you know, delete. Oops, sorry, I done. Sorry, I've just done something strange with my screen. There we go. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of that towards the end of the talk. So that's basically the only site map I could find, and I found one very, very blurred photograph of the people working on the site in 1947, but it wasn't worth including. So here we go. Here's a much better view of it. So on a beautiful day, which is not that common in central Scotland, but here is the Nissen hut that was reused. It was brought up from the side of the Forth and put there, and in 1947, and the archaeologists used that to sort their finds, and they even slept in there and stuff while they were doing the excavation in 1947-48. So you can see it's quite a substantial site. It's not actually at the very top of the hill. The top of the hill is off to the right here. So this is an area that they obviously felt, right, we can use the flattish ground here to. It is nearly at the top of a hill. You have to climb quite a long way to get to it. You come up a little path here. There's no vehicular access to it at all. And as you can see, there's a ditch round here, and because this is in Scotland, nearly at the top of a hill, at first I thought they must just have dug it out, be earth and broken rocks and stuff, but they actually had to cut it into the rock itself. So they estimated that it was at least a metre deep, cut into solid rock, which is no mean undertaking. This was this is 5,500 years ago. And they built a bank on the outside. This is where it's really interesting, you've got to read a lot of different takes on how things were done, because some places you look at and it says that the bank was on the inside, which it clearly is not, and some places say it was on the outside, which it clearly is. So don't believe the first thing that you read about any of these sites. And of course, they're all open to interpretation. We weren't there at the time. We won't be able to travel back as far as I know. So it is always, with archaeology, you're doing educated guesses for a lot of these things. So I'll just show you it in the snow so that you can see that even in snow, it's still very obvious. And this sort of cairn thing in the middle, we'll be talking about more. In some views, when I showed this to my partner, she thought that this was concave, but it's not. It's convex. There's the sun is coming in from this side, and that's the shadow of this protruding cairn. These things on top, there's a set of perspex windows which have been there since 1947. I mean, presumably they've been updated, but when I used to go as a kid, we used to troll up here as a family. I'd be 5, 6, 7, something like that. And I adored going here because there's a staircase there's a ladder that you can go into in this at the top of this little cairn, and you go down into it. And what my mum and dad, I'm sure they would be committed to social service for doing this, but what my mum and dad used to do was they would let me go into here, and they would shut the hatchway on me so that I couldn't suddenly get out because it was a very heavy hatchway. I wasn't strong enough to push it up myself. And they'd go off for an hour and a half's walk up the hills because nobody else ever seemed to be there. It was just there's you know it was completely uninteresting to the people of central Scotland. And I would sit in there and play with the mock bones and pretend I was a beaker person, and I'd lie down in the graves in there and generally be uh, interested in archaeology at that very early age. So that's what set me up. When I was a child, this it didn't look like this. They hadn't put this gravel area. They hadn't denoted the post holes. It wasn't all nicely mown like this, and there was a lot more trees in the area. So this field here and all round here was trees. So you came upon it as a sort of it felt somehow much more special. Nowadays, there's a just here where my pointer is, there's a very large radio mast, which somewhat spoils the feeling of it. And it doesn't feel nearly as secret and wonderful as it did when I was a kid. You really felt like you'd stumbled across something that nobody else had found. So that's why I was interested in telling you about it, as sort of like how things have changed over time. So there's the snow version. This is before the radio mast was put there. Unfortunately, I don't have any photos of me as a kid there. Uh, so I'm sorry about that. I did look, but I just couldn't find any. So this is the side view of it. So you can see how much the cairn sticks up and these various standing stones. Oh, sorry, I'll just go back for a second to this one. So you can see these post holes coming around here. I will talk about those more. And then the second ring of what they call post holes. But as you can see, they are very large indeed. So there is a lot of debate now saying, because it was always thought of as a wood henge, not standing stones. But what on earth size of trees must they have had in these holes? They are huge, these things. So, and given that we have been able to find standing stones at the preceptory, the Torfington preceptory, and as markers on fields and various things around and about, there is now that is the same stone as other pieces of stone on the site. There is now quite a lot of thought that maybe these weren't it wasn't a wood henge, or that the wood henge very quickly got turned into a double ring of standing stones. So again, a lot of debate on it. We don't know for sure. It's now run by Historic Scotland. I think that's what it's called up there. And it's the only staffed Historic Scotland archaeological site on mainland Scotland. So from April to September, there's a little man lives in the not lives, but is in the Nissen hut. And even though it is more popular now and more known about, I came across this Facebook comment by a guy who'd been up there in the height of summer. And he said, the custodian was well chuffed someone came and gave us a full tour and history of the place. We could barely get away. So it's still quite, even though they've actually got a member of staff there, April to September. And it's really well worth visiting. Not just for the interesting site itself, and the various interpretations of it. But also you get a fantastic view now from there, which I didn't see as a child because there was, loads and loads of trees around. So I'll just show you that. But in this gravelled area, sorry, I keep wanting to go forward and then coming back. In this gravelled area, I think there's other shots will show you this. They've used sort of color coded gravel, so you can pick out where the post holes were, and so on and so forth. So I think they've done those with pink gravel and white edging stones, and the rest is grey or something like that. Again, that's all completely new. That none of that was there. This was just like rough grassland all over here. And you stumbled about and fell in the ditch because you couldn't see it because it was, high grass and stuff. So you can see it much, much better than when I was a kid. There's the snow one. There's the side view. And you can see the far hills in the distance there. Those are the Oak Hill Hills, which I could see from my little attic bedroom near Reading, near Polmont, across the Firth of Forth. And that's the view from the site. So this is the Forth Valley all along here. So to your right is Edinburgh, to your left is Stirling, and so on and so forth. This is the big industrial complex of Grangemouth where the North Sea oil comes in. And it was extremely smelly in my youth. There was enormous gas flares and a very smelly Mother's Pride factory down there. I probably got permanent lung damage because I was a middle distance runner in my teens, and I used to run from my house, I think it was 4.5 miles, down to Grangemouth Stadium, athletics stadium, and do my training there. And the amount of smog and stuff from the ICI chemical works and the oil refineries was pretty appalling. So anyway, but it's a fantastic view. And these hills here are the Ochill Hills, Ochil. So you can see it's a really lovely site to go and visit. That's another view of the side of the cairn, where you can see the steps that they've put in. And that's a little sort of metal box around there so that they can shut and lock the top. And then there's the top of the ladder sticking out, it's a fixed ladder. And you can see here, this is the pink gravel in the post hole, as we're calling it. And you can see the size of that. I mean, that is just absolutely massive. And these stones around the edge, they were part of one of the original cairns. Now there's three cairns at Cairnpapple, and I'll go into that over the ages. So this is what the usual reconstruction thing. On some of these reconstructions that I looked at, they'd got the bank inside the ditch, even though they'd taken, they'd done all the work, the artist had done all the work to do it, which is wrong. There's the ditch here and then the bank outside. And this is quite common in a lot of these what we call ritual sites, but of course we have absolutely no idea what they did there. We just use the word ritual in archaeology when we don't really know what it's for. It could have been a car boot sale went on there 5,500 years ago. But the bank is usually on the outside to create a sense of privacy. And we think that usually there would be some sort of wattle fence on top of that to create a screen so that whatever goes on inside is sort of secret and just has a bit more privacy, especially on that exposed hilltop. And then there's two quite broad entrances to the site. You can see that's where the ditch hasn't been dug, and they align north-south, exactly north-south across this circle, but it wasn't really a circle. It was always quite egg-shaped. And I wonder whether that it might have been deliberate, but I wonder whether it was that it was so hard to dig through the bedrock that when they found a slightly easier bit, they changed the shape of it. I mean, like anybody would when they're on a building site. Okay, so that's it. Another demonstration of it in the snow. So you can see the snow, light snow always helps pick out features in the landscape. Around here in Leicestershire, we have a lot of ridge and furrow, medieval ridge and furrow in fields around. And when there's very light snow on, you can pick them out really, really easily. And you realize the miles and miles and miles that medieval ploughmen would have gone in the over the years. So there's the north-south alignment again of the entrances to it. And they are showing clearly a wooden henge. Those aren't in the huge sockets. Sorry, I'll just go back again. But those wooden posts aren't in these sockets here. They are in these slightly smaller sockets on the outside there. I hope this is making sense so far. So there we go. So I think, and this is written in some of the papers that I looked at, that at one point it might well have looked quite like the Ring of Brodgar, which you'll all know about. Obviously, that's stone. I've been up there, and it is very impressive. I've been to quite a few of these stone circles. And to me, that makes a lot more sense of the size of the inner ring, that they were stone. Because you don't just put a large, like 3 meter, 4 meter high stone in. You dig a socket for it, but then you pack it round to stop it sliding from side to side or falling over. You pack it round with large stones at the bottom to hold it in place. Hence, you need quite a large socket for them to go into. So, anyway, that's just a theory that it was standing stones and they've been removed. So there's another view of the site, and you can see the size. You can start to see now the size of the cairn with some people there. Those people, by the way, are on the very far side of that cairn. It's not like the cairn is not 4 people high. It's definitely not, but you can start to see the size of it. There we go. There's some people walking up to go inside. I thought it'd be quite nice for you to sort of have a sense of going inside, rather than me just droning on about dates and stuff. So there's the hatchway that I used to go down, and above that there's these metal doors, as I say, that close over and can be fully locked, which was, I mean, my parents didn't lock them, just to let you know, they didn't lock them, but and the reason that it's so light in there is because sorry, there we go. There are these windows cut in the roof, and perspex windows put in. Now, when I was a child, I thought, wow, these Neanderthals were amazing. Not Neanderthals, Neolithic people were amazing. They knew they could use concrete. They had perspex. They had metal ladders. They had whitewash. I had no idea that this wasn't the original cairn that all the information was about. But this is simply a cairn built, a sort of dome, a concrete dome built over a couple of what the archaeologists at that point considered important stuff. It does relate sort of to cairns that were built on the site by the by the Neolithic and the Bronze Age people. But anyway, it's concrete and it's completely artificial because, of course, a cairn is solid. It's not, never occurred to me that you wouldn't be able to go in and see the people that you buried. But of course, it was completely covered in stones. A cairn in Scotland is a hill made of stone that you'll see on top of mountains and stuff. They use them as way markers and stuff. So this would have been ish the size of one of the cairns on Cairnpapple, and ish the sort of height. But actually, they've since realised that the cairn at this point over these two, I'll show you in a minute, these two important graves, would have possibly even been 30 meters high. So a huge mound of stones, 30 meters high. And as you can see, this is at what, like 3 meters tops, I should think, in there. maybe 4 meters. So my illusions as a child of Cairnpapple as Neolithic people knowing whitewash, perspex, metal, concrete, and all cairns being empty in the middle, being empty spaces. It took me a very long time to realize how wrong I was with that. But what's lovely about it is that when you go in, no matter how much the wind is blowing and how much the rain is sloshing down outside, you go down this little short ladder that I've shown you back here, and suddenly all the noise goes, and it feels really special in there. I don't think I've ever been when there's been anybody else there. So you just go in and it's like a very personal experience. Yeah, it's really amazing, actually. So this was the first grave that they sort of unearthed. And as you can see, it's been made in a very substantial way with this headstone here. So at this point, this person would have been laid to rest without a cairn over them. Okay, so they would have been laying in there. And when I used to go, they had a couple of beaker pots, repro pots, I hasten to add, that I used to play at tea parties with. And also there was various bones in there. Now I thought that they were real bones, real people's bones. But many years later, my mum and dad said, "Don't be daft, they're plastic." So, but I used to play with the bones and rattle the bones and put them out in pretty patterns and this and that and the other while my parents went off for a walk. So which I think is just disgusting. They've slopped this concrete round. I mean, all I can think is maybe they had some vandals. It's not a very nice area around there. There's a lot of vandalism, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of drug taking in the villages around there. It's not a pretty part of Scotland. And all I can think is that they had people going in and pushing the curbstones and pushing the standing stone into the grave, maybe, and so they've secured them very, very thoroughly now. But I think it looks dreadful. I don't know if any of you have been to the house that they think is Wuthering Heights on the Haworth Moor. But when I lived in Yorkshire, we used to go out there quite often. And then I think it was Historic England decided that it really needed capping off. The walls needed capping off to stop deterioration. And so they used exactly like this. it was just disgusting. Great wodges of concrete on the tops of the walls. No attempt to color match them or anything like that. It looked an absolute eyesore. So anyway, there we go. Oh, that's my opinion. Um, so what else? So that's what it used to look like. Um, right. Sorry, I'm flicking backwards and forwards because I'm yeah, so here we go. So uh the this important grave is at one end, and it was sorry, I'm just trying to find on my notes what I ba, 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 ba. Yeah, so in the Bronze Age, so that's 4,000
Yes,
years
hello.
ago. Hello? So 5,500 years ago, they made that henge. And then 5,000 years ago, they made this grave here. And then 4,000 years ago, in the Bronze Age, they made this kist burial. And I've got a better photo of it. Here we go. So there were two people in here. One was in a crouched position, and there was some skeletal remains there, enough for them to know that they were in a crouched position. And then there was a cremation burial in a pot, and a couple of other pots in there. And in the grave that I used to play in and lie down in and stuff, there were two beaker style pots, one at the head of the person and one at the foot of the person. And they think that they probably held food and drink for the afterlife for that person. But of course, techniques back in just after the Second World War were nothing compared with what we've got today. Um, they they would probably just have had a quick cursory look inside these pots. Um, and because of the acidic soil in Scotland, there was no trace whatsoever of skeleton. Even though I got to play with the bones, there wasn't actually a skeleton there. There was just some slight staining on the. Yeah, sorry, I'm leaping ahead here, aren't I? Getting excited. I'll go to the nicer looking one. Here we go. In here, in the soil, there was just a little bit of staining where there obviously uh, change of colour because of where the body had been. And at this end, there was a small scatter of the enamel from some teeth. The only grave goods, as I say, was a beaker style pot up here and a beaker style pot down here, which did not have cremated remains. They had other stuff in them, but they couldn't identify them at that time. But they think food and drink. And then there was a long wooden item, which certainly didn't have a sort of spearhead or anything on it when they found it. But if you remember from that original drawing that I showed you of the cairn that had been broken into and had been robbed out of stone, of nice stone, um, if there was a nice looking, say, flint or some other, item, um, it was probably nicked. Um, if I'd been in there and found it, I would have nicked it as a 6-year-old. So, but they call it a club rather than a spear haft or whatever. So it was obviously quite substantial. It wasn't like a thin spear shaft. And then where they found the pieces of enamel, they also found another piece of wood, which they've tentatively suggested might have been a wooden mask put onto the face. I've not seen any drawings of these or photographs of these. I don't know if they're still at the University of Edinburgh. It's been very hard to find out what happened to things that they recovered. And again, I've found this when I've been investigating other archaeological things, and I'm sure you have as well, and in your researches for talks and things, is that the sheer volume of archaeological finds over the years. Back then, they weren't as rigorous about writing things up. They weren't as rigorous about keeping things for future scientific tests. They didn't really think about that. Um, but nowadays, we've got into this situation where we have so much stuff with so many archaeological digs going on because of new developments, housing developments, and road developments and stuff all over the country, and that you have to have archaeological digs all over the place. That's why we have Digging for Britain on every year. That they have great big tubs, plastic tubs of soil that they've taken out of sites, thousands and thousands and thousands of these, and they are having to spend millions of pounds every year to store these things, and keep them labeled and in good, good condition, so that in the future maybe we can use scientific tests that we've never even heard of to find out more about places. But it's become a huge problem, and museums are now saying that they are full and that they do not have any more storage space. So it's worth thinking about these things in terms of archaeology, and I've become a bit fascinated by it, as you can tell. So, can I just pause for breath and have a drink and ask if there's any questions so far?
Of course. You mentioned that the soil. I was just wondering what kind of rock was it up there? Because I mean, a lot of Edinburgh is sort of volcanic igneous.
Mm,
But the
mm.
Rockies round by where they were digging.
I haven't looked into that, which is terrible because I am into geology, as you know, Mary. So I haven't looked into that. I know it's very, very hard,
Mm,
but to me, that looks more sedimentary
it does.
than igneous.
Well, I'm
Uh,
thinking, the tools they had at the times were only other rocks or antlers. The
mm,
thought of them
mm.
trying to dig a meter deep into granite is
Oh
incredulous,
no,
isn't
no,
it?
no, it's definitely not granite.
Mm.
No, but I can find out and let you know what, because uh, yeah, I can find out what the geology of that area is. I've got a map of the area. So sorry,
No,
should
no.
have looked
It's,
into
it's
that.
just a question that came to mind because whenever I make my notes, I always jot down where I think there's something I want to know in case it's not said later on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, quite right. That's great. Any other questions, anybody? I'm not really sticking to my notes particularly.
Let's see if there's
Uh,
anything in the chat. Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I've got the emails, but I won't bring them up at the moment because I'm not quite sure what it might do to the recording. John Collis has asked whether it might be shale.
no,
Too
no, I
soft?
don't think so. No, this isn't shale.
Mm.
No.
It looks more like
Um,
sandstone or
I
limestone.
think it's sandstone.
Yeah.
Um, there's there's not a lot of limestone in that area, so I would think it's sandstone.
It makes
Um,
sense given the volcanism and the origins of Scotland, really.
yeah, yeah, but no, I mean by no means all of Scotland was volcanic.
Mm.
There are areas of limestone and all sorts of other things around Scotland. Scotland's geology is a lot more various than England's, for instance.
But that's not
Um,
surprising given its journey, is it really?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And the fact that it finally tore itself off the North American plate and smashed into England, it was a separate, completely separate island. So we used to have, in central Scotland, that's a fault line. Just you hear about the Highland fault line further up,
Yeah.
where Loch Ness comes diagonally across Scotland like that. That's a huge fault line. There's
Indeed.
three huge fault lines across Scotland, but the other one is straight through the central belt of Scotland. And we used to have earthquakes when I was a kid. And we would regularly wake up, as a family, we'd regularly wake up and think, why have I woken up? and then sometimes go downstairs and find one of my dad's pictures. He was an artist, had fallen off the wall and smashed, because of the shaking. I mean, they're tiny earthquakes compared with what they get in Japan, but the fault line is still slightly moving. Um,
But I was going to say the other thing as well, from what you're saying, it sounds to me as though even plate tectonics has politics. Scotland obviously wanted to depart from America even back then. And
yeah,
it seems to me as well that geology has done things that people can't in terms of unifying the British Isles, So
exactly, exactly. So yeah, what I love is that I'm doing a talk for a maps group that I'm in tomorrow, in fact, about plate tectonics, similar to the one that I gave our geology group, Mary, but a bit more, well, quite a lot more detailed. And I always take the Mid-Atlantic Ridge as an example of how we can keep ourselves away from America, because the Atlantic Ocean is growing at the rate of our fingernails every year.
perhaps
So
not fast enough for our liking, but
I
we'll take
know,
it.
I know. But yeah. So anyway, right, I'll get back to the thing. So yeah, in the Bronze Age, so that's 4,000 years ago, they did build a small stone and clay. So there must have been clay deposits around cairn just off center inside the monument. And I think that's the cairn that the 1947-48 excavation is sort of trying to emulate. Um, and it had a standing stone outside of it on the east and a setting of smaller stones around it. Um, and there were three upright stones. Sorry, I'll just go back to this. Sorry about this. Here we go. So um, there were actually three totally separate cairns at Cairnpapple, um, and they were at totally different times as well. So the 1947 people chose to sort of reconstruct the Bronze Age one, but as you can see, there was also one here, and then there was actually, when they came to excavate the site, the broken into cairn that I showed you actually covered the entire site. So there was, you know, uh, gradually they built bigger and bigger and bigger cairns to cover up more and more and more of the site at different times. And sometimes there was like 2,000 years between these. Um, However, I have to say that there wasn't very much uh, organic material ever found on the site. And the guy who did the Second World War, just after the Second World War excavations, which is the only excavations that there has been on the site. They've just sort of tidied it up since then. Um, he wrote loads and loads of books. His book, Neolithic Cultures of the British Isles in 1954, was highly influential until radiocarbon dating tests exposed flaws in his chronology. Now, Pigott, until his dying day, and I think he died in the 1980s, until his dying day, he said that he considered radiocarbon dating was archaeologically unacceptable because every other shred of my evidence points to my dates being correct. So it's quite interesting that sometimes we can cling on to, no, I'm right, I'm absolutely right. And then, you get a new technique comes along and questions things, and you just have got such a fixed idea of, you've got it right. And what do these scientists know anyway? And I have seen other instances of that when I've been looking at other archaeological things, not just about Professor Pigott, but he is very, very well known for being extremely outspoken against radiocarbon dating. Um, and we all know that radiocarbon dating isn't really, really accurate. You always have a margin of few hundred years um, either side, but to just dismiss it completely because he figured he knew what was going on. And so when you read some of his papers, he is very dogmatic. This is a ritual site. This is what they did on it. Well, we don't know. We just don't know. So anyway, it's interesting to think about that. So
Can I
the
just ask a
book,
quick question,
yeah, of
Char?
course, of course.
Bearing in mind this had been dug into over time, are we
Mm.
even sure that the carbon dating material was contemporary with the cairns themselves? Do we know that
Yeah,
for sure?
yeah, exactly. Because, who knows? Who knows? But what they did was they sort of they the first thing that they found on site, they dug right down, layer after layer after layer after layer. So they went through, they destroyed lots of things to find out what was the earliest thing on site. And then they rebuilt them. Um, in this 1947 rather casual way. We never do this now. We'd never put a concrete cairn over something. It would be considered absolute sacrilege. So again, it's an interesting take on things. Um, but what they found was that the earliest things that they found on site, well below everything that you can see here, was two or three fire sites, fireplaces, with burnt hazel and burnt oak, and a couple of broken axes, stone axes, one of which came from Cumbria and one of which came from, oh, where was it? Somewhere else. Um, mm, mm, mm. Sorry, I can't see where it is in my notes. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah, from axe factories in Wales and Cumbria. Now, it is quite easy to trace stone axes and their geological composition to exact locations, as we know. So there was two stone axe fragments and some potsherd. Um, sorry, I thought there were two hearths, but there were six hearths, and this is from 5,500 years ago. So clearly, the early Neolithic people in West Lothian didn't live isolated lives. They were trading with people from Cumbria, from Wales, um, whether through middlemen or whatever. None of those hearths is visible anymore. I haven't been able to find a map of even where they were on the site,
Mm,
because they were covered over in the late Neolithic period, 5,000 years ago, by that great wood henge that
uh,
I was
uh,
talking about.
I mean, I know we're back into the world of ritual here, Shah, but
Mm,
bearing
mm.
in mind the importance that we think hills had in the past for meeting places and all these kind of things and so on, is the fact that the axes were broken significant at all?
I don't know. I did see one drawing of one, and it didn't look as if it was like a perfect axe that had been broken. It looked like an axe that had been used
Mm.
and had cracked a bit off, so it wasn't very useful anymore. So I don't think that's never been mentioned in any of the
Mm.
things I've looked at. They've always just called it two stone axe fragments.
The
So
reason it came to mind was bearing in mind what was built on the site afterwards.
yeah,
So it
absolutely.
suggests that the site is important, even if
Yeah,
the artifacts weren't.
yeah, that's right. That's right. So um uh yeah, so where have I got to? um yeah, so there's so at the time that this clay and stone cairn was built, um, just off centre, as you can see, um, there was a 2 meter high standing stone to the east and a setting of smaller stones, which I presume are those ones that I pointed out around the edge of the cairn. And also there's an arc of 7 small pits. Now, which those are, I don't think they're these. I think those are supposed to be post holes. But anyway, 7 small pits, 6 of which contained cremated bones, and 2 contained remains of bone skewer pins, so that like grave artifacts. And underneath the cairn, there was these traces found of this one burial that I've pointed out with the big headstone that I used to lie in and play with the plastic bones. And then this cairn was later covered by a second, much larger cairn, so 15 meters across. So I presume this is the 15 meters here. So there was a small cairn covering one grave, and then there was another much bigger cairn built with a curve of massive stone slabs, and I think a lot of those had been robbed out. There are some stone slabs, but they've decided that some of those stone slabs are now at the Thorpe Presbytery. Um, Right. Um, yeah, more stone was brought in from a local hill, so that must be a different geology for them to know that, to increase this cairn to about 30 meters in diameter. So it goes from this small one to 15 meters across to 30 meters across. So it then covers the entire site. And it's at that point that we get the kith burials, the ones that we've seen in here that I pointed out. Different style of burial. Sorry about this, flicking backwards and forwards, everybody. I hope it's not too irritating for you. So that's the original burial, with allegedly with the club and the mass. And that's what it looks like now. And then this is the kist burial alongside it. So when they built the much bigger cairn, they built this in at that point. And as I say, there were 2 burials in here. The top stone here was broken by the archaeologists when they were trying to move it. There's a bit of a graphic drawing of them trying to shift it and it's slipping. I think somebody got hurt as well in the process. Anyway, the stone broke. So only half of it is there now, and they moved the other bit somewhere else. And the yeah, massive capstone. But yeah, I told you about what was in there. And then the kist stone itself, this not this one, but the one that broke off and that they moved, it actually had 3 cup marks pecked into the surface. You know, those cup and ring marks that you get on stones. And interestingly, 4 of the stones that have so far been found at Torfichen Presbytery or in the surrounding fields, using them as gateposts or distance markers and this and that and the other. Several of those have got cup and ring marks on them. And I'll come back to that when I get to that. So it just shows you that there must have been a really decent sized population there, who were very committed to this site because it was in use for thousands of years, with with quite a substantial gap. I can't find my notes about that, but I put an exclamation mark so I could see it, but there was a point when, but this is Pigott again, so do we actually completely believe him? There was a period of about 1,500 to 2,000 years when the site wasn't used at all. And then they came back and put that huge cairn on. So I don't know. I don't know whether we can trust him because he wasn't using carbon dating. What was he using to decide on that? So yeah, here we go. Larger kiln, larger burial between there's the small cairn, then there's the medium-sized cairn, and there's 2,000 years, then there's the larger cairn, and then 1,000 years after that, 1,000 years ago, sorry, 1,000 years ago, 4 Christian burials were dug into the site. They were east-west facing, and there weren't any grave goods. So maybe they were again an attempt to Christianize the site. Maybe that's when the cairn was broken open and robbed for stone and whatever else they could find in there. There may have been other grave goods, you see. There may have been beads, there may have been metal, there may have been all sorts of things that we don't know about because they've been nicked. And the reason that I'm talking about metal things is that on the next hill to very, very close to Cairnpapple, on the next hill, which is, I think, called the Huddleston Hill or something. In 1606, a shepherd was up there and came across a lump of silver ore. And so there was a bit of a silver rush there from 1606 to 1614. Silver mining went on in the area, and it was the purest quality silver ever found in Scotland. And there's some think that there are mentions in the records to think that quite a lot of that silver went into making the Scottish crown. So so I, given that it was like so near the surface and so pure, I wonder whether, Neolithic people and Bronze Age people who were in the area, clearly in quite considerable numbers to be able to build and keep building and keep using this area, it would have taken considerable people power to dig that ditch, make the bank, do 3 cairns one after the other, etc., move these great big slabs of stone. So I wonder whether they actually did manage to find some of the silver and use it themselves. But that's just my complete speculation. It's just that, it's there, it's on the surface, it's very pure, so it would take virtually no work to turn it into something, some bling or other. And that would mean that the grave had probably been robbed of that. Oh, a little, yeah, just a little going back to the beginning of my notes, which I should have said at the start. The name Cairnpapple Hill is quite funny because here in Leicestershire, there's an Iron Age hill fort fairly near me, and it's called Bredon on the Hill. Now, that literally means Bree is the name for hill in ancient English or ancient something or other, an ancient language. Bree is a hill. Dun is Gaelic type thing. Edinburgh, that means, Dun is hill. Okay, so you've got hill, hill on the hill. Bredon on the Hill, and
Eh,
Cairnpapple exactly the same. So people call it Cairnpapple Hill. Cairn is a hill. Papple is Gaelic for tit, little tit. So like you get the Paps of Jura and the Pap of Glencoe, if you've heard of those, that means that you've got a small but very pert and upright little hill, and then hill. So you've got hill, hill, hill. It just shows how as languages change, we forget what they mean, and we then carry on using them. So I thought that was quite a fun thing, particularly since we've got Breedon on the hill just here. You'll be pleased to know I'm coming to the end. I don't know what time it is. Sorry about this. Da, da, da. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, told you about the small visitor centre. Okay, it says here that the current display, which is in the Nissen hut, and then there's interpretation boards around the site, attempts to show all the main phases of the site at the same time. So it's about 1,000 feet up, by the way. So that's why it catches the wind, and why it's so lovely when you go inside the little cairn, that it's so cozy and warm. And that always reminds me of going into brochs in Scotland. If you've ever been into a broch, or one of the old style crofts up there, they were always built with rounded walls, rounded ends to the walls, not sharp corners, because sharp corners cause the wind to whoosh and woo even more. So they were always built with slightly rounded walls, so that the wind would slide round without making too much noise. And if you've ever been into a Scottish broch, they're exactly the same. You go in and suddenly you're in a totally cozy, different environment. Really very special. Okay. Yeah, so then we come on, just as a little, I've talked about it anyway, but the Torfichen preceptory, and there's a little very early chapel there. It's only Cairnpapple is only about a mile from Torfichen and the preceptory, so it's no distance at all. I mean, it is a distance when you're dragging great big chunks of stone, but this would be done in with wheeled vehicles and so on and so forth, wheeled carts and things, and horsepower and stuff. Anyway, St. Ninian founded a church there in about 400 AD. So it is very early. There was a lot of very early Scottish saints, Saint Columba and so on and so forth. They were much more active than in a lot of places in England. And so what they think now is that they did unearth the cairn, this great big cairn, robbed stone out of it, also probably took away quite a lot of standing stones from around the area and reused them in the kirkyard at Torfichen. Some of them have been reused as gravestones, some of them as marker stones, and there are 4 what they call sanctuary stones in the kirkyard. And then at mile intervals on the 4 cardinal points, there are standing stones that have had, some of them have got ring marks on, as I said, and most of them have then had a crude Christian cross cut into them to sort of Christianize them. So I think I've got some pictures of that. Those are the alleged post holes. Here we go. So there's one of the sanctuary stones in Torfichen churchyard, and there's the ring, the pit marks cut in Neolithic times, and there's the top of that stone. So they've actually cut a crude Christian cross into there and a little well, and they think maybe St. Ninian used that for holy water, but that's just a guess, complete guess. So I haven't bothered taking photographs of all the other ones, but There are, yeah, that's me finished. There are quite a few of these around. There's four or five in the churchyard, as I say, and then there's these four cardinal ones. And then there were Knights Templar in the area as well, and they definitely took some standing stones and reused them. Um, and they've also found them, as I say, on field boundaries and gate posts and stuff like that. They can identify those as having been dragged from Cairnpapple. So I hope you feel that I've sort of given you an overview of the area and how different people have seen it over time. Can we trust the World War II archaeologists? Um, were they finding a site that had been so robbed out that it was very difficult to interpret anyway? Um, this, we've seen examples all over the world of people not liking old remains. If you remember, do you remember the ISIS people bombing those Buddhist statues, ancient Buddhist statues? Um, and if you go to the Alhambra, for instance, a Muslim, fantastic gardens and everything, there's this absolutely hideous Christian church built right in the bang in the middle of it because they wanted to Christianize it. So it's not just one religion doing this, all religions do this. And we somehow feel, sometimes we feel very in awe of old things and preserve them very faithfully. But quite often, people over time have felt like, oh, this is a magic place. We've got to somehow get rid of the magic or break it or,
Mm.
da da da. And so they've done various things over the years. So there we go. I'm exhausted now. So I'll stop sharing and
Yeah, thank you, Char. That was wonderful. I'll just stop the recording now so we can have a chat. Okay.